Sometimes we lose the boldness of Jesus when we only focus on his meekness.
Yeah.
But if we only focus on the boldness, then we get an altered version of Jesus as well.
There's a muddying up that's been made that strength or even anger or whatever equals evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we got to be able to be evil or commit crime or, like that kind of stuff. And like, no, it's nothing that. It's still just as pure as the love, joy, peace, and patience and kindness. And, but there's aspects of that in that displays of power or at times anger when necessary, or, it's the godly jealousy. It's the godly righteous indignation.
But humility, how do we balance that? I'm going to take a strong stance on this and say we don't balance humility. I think humility is everything. I think you dive headfirst into it.
Welcome to the Biblical Living Podcast. I'm here with Alex from the Pit Ministries. You can check out the link to his channel below. And one of my pastor friends, Chase, just a regular dude, pastor friend of mine. And
regular dude.
Regular dude.
And we are going
Unleaded dude.
Yeah. Premium. Supreme.
Supreme.
Got that race car fuel.
93 octane dude.
If you want to know, it's perfect for today.
Hey.
Because our topic today that we are going to be discussing is men.
Dudes.
What does it mean to be a godly man? We're going to talk about being a man in the kingdom of God. So good to have a supreme premium dude here to talk about that.
Alpha dude.
Yeah.
Alpha male.
Dude. Alpha.
Yep.
What's the thing? What's the pill? Is it the red or the blue pill? The red pill. Okay. We're red pills up in here.
I think that's like a Matrix.
It is. I just don't remember which one it was the good one.
Blue pill was like go back into the Matrix. Red pill was wake up. I saw it when I was a kid. That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's red.
I haven't seen it in a while.
Well,
Let's wake up.
I'm just saying we're gonna really red pill you now.
Oh man!
But in the biblical way.
Right.
Whoa. Like a white pill or something.
That's a real one too. That's the hope pill.
The hope pill, white pill and black pill.
What?
And red
Black
blue
pill means you're
hopeless.
Yeah, hopeless.
Oh man!
Depressed. White
so then, am I a white pill?
Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
White
Are
pill's
there
good.
like connotations attached to these?
It's
that
really
I'm
good.
aware of that? Okay.
White pill's good.
I'm telling you, it's good. I don't know for sure. There could be connotations.
I certainly don't know.
So
leave a comment below if you know something I don't.
I said we're going to do this in the church way. Just a funny story before we jump into the topic. When we were teenagers, we were both Christians in the church in our late teenage years, and he was caught checking out a girl.
Oh,
and he tried to cover his tracks by saying he wasn't checking her out in the world way. He was checking her out in the church way.
Right.
Man.
And of course, we gave him a hard time. We're like, what does that mean? You look at her and say, I wonder if she's filled with the Holy Ghost. Like,
Yeah.
what?
He
What
was
checking her out
he
in
was
the church
trying to
way?
examine the fruit.
yeah, that's what that comes down to. To
That
quote
literally
Song of
just brought a
Solomon.
completely different connotation.
You guys have got your mind in the gutter. That is not where I was trying to take that. I was trying to take it back to scripture,
I bet
everybody.
she walks in a lot of peace, patience, and joy.
All right. So now that we've gotten that craziness out of the way, so you want to stick around. We've got our Saint or Ain't coming up at the end, so you don't want to miss Saint or Ain't, and stick around. But let's jump into the topic of men.
Man.
So right off the bat, first of all, let's just define what it is to be a man. Not okay.
It's $1 million question.
Biologically,
You want to go there?
I know this is a difficult topic in our culture today, but I'm not so much talking about biological manhood as much as I'm talking about for a man. What does it mean for them to be a godly man, or what does it just mean biblically to be a man? Like what attributes and what things should men have in their life as a godly man, or as just biblically, what is a manhood?
At its base,
I have something to say about that.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
No, go ahead.
At like the base root of it, a biblical man is somebody that just basically behaves how God would ask them to behave. So the biblical man is the man that follows the instructions the Bible lays out for us.
Yeah.
And some of those instructions we might get into tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think like with anything, Jesus is the example.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man. We should be like Jesus.
He was a man.
And all of the attributes that he had, the strength and the leadership and the humility and the peace and the joy and the, everything that comes with it.
I think Jesus is an interesting example because Jesus gets misinterpreted so much amongst people. People view one attribute of Jesus and thinks that's what Jesus was.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'll talk to people and talk about how Jesus is loving and meek and mild. Jesus was also the guy who made a whip and went into a temple and overthrew money changers' tables, and was willing to. I mean, he looked at the Pharisees and was willing to stand up to them and be like, you're whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid of being bold, and I think sometimes we lose the boldness of Jesus when we only focus on his meekness.
Yeah.
But if we only focus on the boldness, then we get an altered version of Jesus as well. So
let's
dive into that a little bit. If Jesus is our example, then what does that look like in the fullness of who he was, not just one attribute, but how do we take his mildness and his meekness and compare that with his strength, and how does that work in daily life? Like, how do we walk in both?
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure we'll kind of step all over this point tonight, but having the capability of something without enacting it all the time. You know what I mean? It's the meekness is strength under restraint kind of thing. It's not that meekness is not the same thing as weakness. Meekness is the, you have the ability to blow up. You're not afraid to, you're not too weak to, you're choosing not to. And that's Jesus. He had him going to the cross is a perfect example. He could have called upon a host of angels at any time to, rescue him out of that situation, but he restrained that. He had so much authority and power at his disposal, which is what I believe, we're called to as men, to walk in that, to operate in it, and then to use it when necessary, to protect what we love, to protect God, to protect what's important, to lead, to, set that example, but also restrain it whenever it's necessary.
Yeah, that meekness, you're not really meek unless you have the capacity to be violent, the capacity to do damage in a way. If you're weak, weakness is not the same thing as meekness. It requires the ability to not be meek, to not be weak, in order to actually encompass that term, that definition there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. I have recently seen a discussion online. It's going to seem completely unrelated, but it's not. But I've seen a discussion online where people were talking about pit bulls. If you're a pit bull owner, don't come at me. But pit bulls, people were talking about how, all these pit bull attacks that, it's how they're raised. It's not the dog. It's not the type of dog. It's how they're raised. Yeah. And they were talking about how, my pit bull is sweet and kind. And then other people were saying, no, it's, that's what everybody says until their pit bull attacks someone. And they were having this debate about whether pit bulls should be pets.
Yeah.
And what stuck out to me, what was interesting to me about it wasn't so much the debate about pit bulls as much as it was recognizing these dogs have within them the strength and the power to kill you. And yet there are times when that can be restrained. And that's, to me, the image of meekness, that within your power, that ability, I'm not saying kill you, but you get the point. Like there's a strength, there's a inward innate nature that is tamed.
Yeah.
And not weakened, but tamed, when it's necessary. So you talk about strength to protect the ones we love, just naturally speaking, if something was happening to my kids, you would see an entire different side of me than you would see at any other moment.
Right.
And that's because that meekness, I can be walking meekness when I'm not exercising that strength, but when something requires it, I'm without even a thought switch into that gear.
Well, and I think there's a distinction that's been made, or there's a muddying up that's been made, that strength or even anger or whatever equals evil.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We got to be able to be evil or commit crime or, that kind of stuff. And no, it's nothing that. It's still just as pure as the love, joy, peace, and patience and kindness. And, but there's aspects of that in that displays of power or at times anger when necessary, or, it's the godly jealousy. It's the godly righteous
Right.
indignation. It's, all of that kind of stuff, and just knowing when to be able to slip into those gears and when not to. And, it's discernment and walking with the Lord and walking in our first and foremost calling of being a man, in this day and age that we live in.
The capacity to do something doesn't necessitate there's an ethic tied to that.
That's good.
So like I can have the capacity to hurt somebody, but I need to actually hurt somebody in a evil way for that to be an evil action.
Yeah.
I can hurt somebody in a good way, saving people, and that's a good action.
Yeah.
Just because there's a capacity, or even an action itself, like the capacity to do something, doesn't mean that it's necessarily evil or good.
Yeah.
The Bible says, be angry and sin not.
Right.
So you can be angry and not have evil or sin attached to it.
Totally.
That's good. I think the concept of capacity is very important. Kind of leads me into where I want to go with the concept. Men are natural leaders. If you're an egalitarian watching this, tune out for a minute.
Another video.
That's
They
another
got
video.
gal in the name.
It's got gal in the name.
So much gals.
But if men are natural leaders, not only is it how we were designed, it's what God calls us to, right?
Yeah.
So we are natural leaders. And so men have a natural capacity for leadership. But what happens with men when men are called to be leaders? So if you're married, you're the leader of your home. If you're in ministry and different things, men are generally leaders. We're called to be leaders. It's part of our nature. Not that women can't lead anything or anything. That's not the point of what I'm saying. But it's just natural for men to be leaders. So with that being said, if we have that capacity, but we're not operating in it because maybe we're not in a position, we're not married, we're single, we're not, leading a church, leading a ministry, leading a job, maybe we have a job, but we're not in any leadership roles, whatever it is. How do men who have the capacity for leadership operate in what God called them to do as leaders if they're not in a position?
I don't know. Just kidding.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. Well, and that's okay. That's another thing we need to talk about. Yeah. It's okay to not know.
For the record, I do know.
But it's okay if you didn't.
I'm just being humble.
It's all right.
It would be totally fine. I don't. I just want everybody to know that.
It's much better to say you don't know than to make up a bunch of bull crap.
Absolutely. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, I definitely do, though. I just want to make that clear, though, before we move on.
Well, I think for me, and I'll throw my answer out there and let y'all piggyback off of it. For me,
let us stew on it.
I think ultimately, before you're a leader of a home, a leader of a ministry, a leader of a job, a leader of anything, you're a leader of your life. Mm-hmm. So you lead yourself. If you're not operating in self-control, you're not being a very good leader. Right. So you learn to lead yourself. We go back to the last episode where we talked about, disciplining yourself and spending time with the Lord. Are you leading your devotional life before God? Are you leading your daily routines? Are you sitting on, playing video games all day and doing nothing with your life? Are you leading, there's ways to lead where you're not in a position, but you exemplify leadership skills in the position you are currently in within yourself.
Yeah.
You don't become a leader and then start acting like a leader.
Right.
You start acting like a leader and then become a leader.
Sure. Well, like societally, that's our position, right? So like when they see a man operating as a man at the grocery store, interacting with people, interacting with women, any of that kind of stuff, they should be able to look at that and emulate what's going on there as a kid, as a ladies looking for that in their future spouse, or whatever that is. Guys that want to surround themselves by that kind of person. Like, we should always be able to look to men to say, like, that's an example of what strength and discipline and courage and all those things look like.
So everybody assess your situation, because everybody's leading in some aspect. We all have like the dreams of being a big boss somewhere and being a leader within quotation marks there.
Yeah.
But everybody's leading somebody. If you've got a family and you're not leading your family, you're failing at that.
Right.
Yeah. Let's start there and then we can move up from there.
Absolutely.
Serve God where you're at, right?
Serve God where you're
That's
at.
kind of the repeating theme there.
Is that in the Bible? Is that in the Bible?
Well, basically, I mean, there's principles.
It's in the
there.
book of Chase.
Yeah.
It's in the book of Chase.
I
Just like
think
the pre-trib rapture is in the Bible.
check out my video on why that's not.
Right. One
Stirring the pot.
helpful step to bring this back into actually being applicable to everybody.
Jeez, bring it back in, Matt Moss.
Look for areas to meet a need,
That's good.
not
That's
exactly
good.
to just lead. Everybody wants to be in charge, but not everybody actually cares about the problem, cares about the task.
That's so good.
So many people in the church want to be an elder, but they're not willing to be a deacon.
Right.
And like if we look back in Acts, when the disciples, the apostles split those two roles, it wasn't because they didn't want to be deacons. It wasn't because they didn't want to help their people, because they couldn't effectively wait tables and teach the word at the same time.
Yeah.
So some people, like, they only want to be elders. They only want to be up in front of people. They don't actually care about the people.
Right.
It's for themselves.
Absolutely.
So check your heart on stuff.
Yeah. Well, because if you really care, you'll be willing to serve.
Mm-hmm.
That's your family. That's people you care about. That's causes you care about. And I think that would be a good thing. I don't know if it bleeds into anything else that we're going to talk about tonight, but like having a cause that you're willing to serve, having something in your life you're willing to, I don't say suffer for, but you're willing to, because oftentimes work and hard work's required. So like if you're a man without that in your life, that'd be a good place to start. Like what's something worth being courageous, being bold, being a leader, developing this, being somebody that people can look up to or whatever, that what's something that's worth pursuing, that's worth developing, all of those things. Yeah. And because I think that's an answer for a lot of men is just like, well, why be any of that stuff that people can look up to? Like I don't have any reason to, I don't have any purpose. I don't have anything I'm passionate about. And I think discovering that, like what's God put in your heart, that you only being the man you're called to be is the way that you'll fulfill that or accomplish that, is the, a big check off on the path to get there.
Yeah, I think you hit on something, the whole concept of serving and being willing to serve something. We talked about Jesus' example. Jesus served. That's what he did.
Yeah.
So from washing the disciples' feet to going to the cross in and of itself was an act of serving. Yeah. It was an act of willing to suffer.
Came to serve, not to be served.
Yeah. And, I think that when we talk about an example of Jesus,
did you guys ever see that meme?
Oh, Lord.
Where it's like Jesus and he's breakdancing in front of all the disciples. So Jesus came to serve, not to be served.
That's right. Now I'm going to find that meme and throw it up right here on the screen.
Son of Man came to serve.
But it's true. Jesus did come to serve.
Absolutely. But that
ultimately
served.
They got served.
Yeah. And the 5,000, they
in
got
your
served.
face.
Got served.
But no, like as him as an example, how did he lead? Well, he served. And so if you find a place to serve, you don't have to have and this is a big thing I see, and this is not really just with men, it's with everybody, but in general, there's this big obsession with position. You're waiting on a position. You're waiting on a title. You're waiting on, and that's not how you don't lead by being given a position.
Right.
You lead from the act of service.
Yeah.
And in that act of service, you might gain a position because people see your service, but positions and titles are meaningless to whether or not you can lead or not.
Yeah.
So you lead, serve God where you're at. You lead where you're at. You lead, and if you, like you said, meet a need, find a need, whatever that need is, maybe it's a need. And here's something real crazy. Maybe the need's not serving in a church.
Whoa.
Maybe the need
is at
the soup kitchen down the road.
You don't need to blaspheme like that on your podcast. Dude.
Maybe the need's in your neighbor's house who, they're remodeling and need some help. Maybe.
If you're not preaching on a stage, Matt Moss, you're not even serving God.
Yeah. I tried to tell my wife my calling's over at my pretty neighbor's house. Is that
not what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like, my calling's over there. I got to go help her clean her pool.
Let's back that up.
Is that what you're doing?
I am not saying that.
No. Try to be a man, Matt Moss.
No, but whatever the need is, that maybe the need is as simple as, hey, there's a family down the road that doesn't have groceries. Let me go buy them some food.
Yep.
Whatever that need is in that act of service, that is you leading, and it's leading in ways that you may not realize. You may not see that as an act of leadership, but to them, you just became a voice in their life. You just met a need for them.
Absolutely.
Now you're a leader to, like, they can look to you, and now maybe you get the chance to witness to them. Maybe you get the chance to, God just gives you, maybe they need advice on something, and hey, this person cares.
Yeah.
And now you've opened that door.
Absolutely.
So leading is more than a position or a title. And I think we get wrapped up in the acknowledgement of others rather than actually leading.
I think that goes into, and I know we've talked about it before, but I may have said it on here before, but like I can remember seasons of praying for God to open doors, basically praying for a title or a position or whatever. And I just wasn't anywhere near the character that was required to be in that position. I would have, thank God he didn't answer that prayer, because I would have blown it up and hurt a bunch of people in the process. And so it's just having the humility to be like, hey, I'm willing to go through the process of development to steward this thing, this calling, or this, whatever.
That's something I've actually got written down here.
Boom.
If you aren't in the leadership role you want, maybe God's sparing you from something. Or maybe he's sparing people from your selfish leadership tactics.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't actually care whether you're the right person for the job or if you're going to do the job well, you probably shouldn't be in that position to begin with.
Absolutely.
You're not the leader those people need.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's something that a lot of times, that's another thing about, this is a big thing that I see men struggle with, is acknowledging that you're wrong, that you're not, that you can't handle it, that this is not something you should be doing because you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
And you don't want to acknowledge that it's not the right fit sometimes. And I think it's okay. And I think men struggle with this, at least in my experience. I've seen me personally and other men struggle with this concept of not wanting to admit failure.
Yeah.
So you're in a position, you're not leading well, you're not doing something right, and then not wanting to admit failure. So you stay in something that you're not equipped for, that you're not, that you really know I should step back from this and let someone else take the lead. Yeah. But because of pride and other reasons, you refuse to admit failure. And it's okay. And when I say admit failure, I don't mean, oh, you're a failure, how, you're terrible. I mean, hey, I'm not doing this well. Yeah. Let me step back and learn so that way I can do it well next time. Yeah. Versus, hey, I'm going to stay in this and because I can't admit that I'm not doing something well.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
It is hard to do. Well, and I mean, it goes against our sinful nature.
Mm-hmm. It goes against even our culture. Like America comes from the West, comes from the Greek Mediterranean honor shame society. Yeah. So everything was honor or shame. If somebody took something from you or you couldn't do something, that was shameful. Mm-hmm. And there's no way to get rid of that unless you take it back or you take something from somebody else. So that's what we've inherited here.
Yeah.
And it's very much a part of culture. And that kind of leads me to the next question. Culturally speaking, what do you think is some of the biggest issues for men in our culture? And it could be from a biblical perspective or from just in general. What's some of the biggest issues you see with men in our culture?
Well, the number one that I see for me, just from what I've seen, is identity. Of what does it even mean to be a man? What does that mean for me? And once I know that answers a lot of those questions of, I can admit that I can admit that I failed because I know my identity is not a failure. Right. I can admit that I messed up because I know my identity is not a mess up. And so if we're running around trying to figure out our identity from other people or our money or our job or our whatever, if we're not secured in that thing, man, we're going to spin our wheels and we may accomplish a lot, but like, who are we in the process? So if we can figure out that, like, who we are, that identity thing as a man, as the callings and giftings that I personally have, as a child of God, as all those things, we can be rooted and established in all that stuff. A lot of the rest of that stuff takes care of itself. That's how I am the leader of my household. That's how I do walk in humility. That's how I do possess the strength that I need to, do what I need to do.
I think you're exactly right. Identity probably is the root of every issue we face. Another big one I can think of would be selfishness, but that comes from not knowing who we are. Just like almost every problem we face comes from that. Yeah. Just that selfishness has a way that it pervades into every area of our life.
Sure.
But this is why men gravitate towards the red pill movement that we were just talking about earlier. These guys are telling all these young, impressionable guys, fulfillment comes from meeting your own desires. And we know as biblical men, trying to learn from the scriptures, that your only fulfillment comes from laying down your life, like Jesus says.
Yeah.
If I were going to think of something that I would answer to this, what one of the top issues, so we've got identity and selfishness. I would say a big issue in our culture is the concept of truth being so relative that like it's hard. Part of being a man is defending truth and standing up for truth. And in our culture, truth is whatever you want it to be now.
Yeah.
And so, and if you speak for some type of objective truth, you're demonized for it.
Yeah.
And I think men are afraid sometimes to come out, and say, this is the truth. This is, and it's not just men, it's women deal with that too. But I'm specifically in dealing with men. I feel like men biblically have a mandate from God to ultimately be the defenders of truth. I see even God gave Adam the command not to eat of the tree. Adam's job was to communicate that effectively to his wife and to lead in that area of defending, this is the truth, this is what God said.
Yeah.
And we see that Eve obviously didn't get the message very well, because when she quoted back what God said, she added something to it. She said, God said not even to touch the tree. Well, God never said that.
Yeah.
But that was her truth in her mind. And I think as a man, it's our duty, our job as men to defend truth. But in our culture, truth is not popular, and truth is, and if you have an objective truth and that contradicts with someone else's truth,
right,
then there's conflict. And unfortunately, there's a lot of men who are afraid of conflict. Not saying you should go out and just start conflict randomly just for the fun of it.
But have the capacity to do so, like we were talking about earlier.
Well, and I think it's another thing, like having the skills to have a conflict that will reach a positive result, not just to win or not. Conflict isn't necessarily screaming and fighting and whatever. Conflict is two people that disagree. Yeah. And they're resolving that issue. But that goes back to the courage that's required to be a man, like the bravery, all that kind of stuff. Like in this day and age, there's stuff that we're going to have to be real brave to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong and this is right, that maybe in years past wasn't required. But that's what's required. That's what's required. I heard a minister say, one time, like, God knew what was going to be going on in 2023 and all the stuff that's going on, and you guys are the ones that he put here at this time, so he must know. He knows what you guys were getting into and equipped you to handle it. And I think it's just what's required. This is our thing. The next generation have their thing. The last generation had their thing. Like this is our thing. So
and this modern or postmodern, there is no truth type of stuff. It's not new. Like we're repeating the same things the Greeks and the Romans did. So their philosophers a lot of them didn't believe in absolute truth either. And then Christianity comes along, and for the next 2,000 years, there is actually truth. We can find it, we can know it because we have a God that's spoken that truth to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, so here's where you talked about conflict and the concept of being willing to and having the capacity to address conflict appropriately in the right way, and when to do it and when not to do it. And so kind of leads me to the next question of how do we balance as men humility, especially in conflict, but not just in conflict, just in general. How do we balance humility with our natural leadership? So we have these natural God qualities that God puts in men to lead, and the courageousness and the things that come with being a man. How do we balance that with humility so we don't have, and I hate using this phrase because I feel like it's playing into the modern culture, but how do we avoid quote unquote toxic masculinity by balancing that with humility? How does that play out?
I don't think, did you want to go?
No. I'll just be quiet.
No, go ahead.
I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding.
He's trying to be humble now.
Yeah, I'm being super humble.
You're really living this out, Alex.
Yeah,
you're a real Christian.
He's living it out as an example.
Man looks like.
That's his answer. His example
You're
is his
welcome,
answer.
everybody.
First off, I hate that term toxic masculinity.
I do too.
I don't think it actually exists. And we can touch on, I guess, what we think masculinity is. That might come up later on. But humility, how do we balance that? I'm going to take a strong stance on this and say we don't balance humility. I think humility is everything. I think you dive headfirst into it. I think it's, even Jocko Willink talks about, it's one of the primary traits of a leader, and he's not even a Christian.
Right.
Like, he just acknowledges that truth, that leaders need to be humble. If you're not taking care of your people, you're not actually going to meet the objective effectively, is something that he would say.
Yeah.
If you don't actually care about taking care of your people, you're really stroking your own ego. And that's where humility needs to come in. We need to put others or the mission or both above our own ego, above our own desires. And that's where we need to lead from that state of humility. I think it's necessary.
Yeah. Well, I think there's an assumption that humility, good, strength, masculinity,
right,
whatever, bad.
Yeah. So
they're opposites. And it's like, it's required, exactly what you're saying. It's the foundation for any good leadership, any good masculinity, any good, that's the humility to admit that I'm wrong. Sometimes that's the most courageous thing you can do, is say I'm wrong.
Right.
Or say, hey, I messed up. Or say, hey, let me hear you out, instead of me just, whatever my fake sense of leadership I think it should look like, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's the foundation for all of that.
I think, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go for it.
A big issue in my mind is that I don't even know if it's most, a lot of men put themselves first in everything without even realizing it. Like, and that's the opposite. That's selfishness, whereas humility would be kind of like our antidote to selfishness in a lot of ways. We need that. I've seen men lead their families in this way. Like, so I knew this guy, and this was when I was a teenager, but I could still notice these things. He wanted to look like he was a good leader. He wanted to look like he was a good dad. So he pretended he might not have even realized it, but he gave off that he was humble. But really, like, his desire was to stroke his own ego, like we said before. He wasn't actually caring to lead his family because his own desires was above that. He wasn't humble. He was prideful. But he wanted to look like a good leader. He wanted to look like a good man. So he acted for short periods of time like a good leader. He acted humbly sometimes. But there was always something that would come along that was more important to him than looking like a good leader for this period of time.
Sure.
And that's when we go off astray, because if that's your goal, is to look like a good person, look like a humble man, look like a good leader, there's always going to be something that comes along that's more fulfills your selfish desires more fully.
What if it's not genuine? It's not really your identity. It'll burn out at some point.
Right, exactly.
You can only hide who you really are.
Yeah.
For a period of time.
Right.
Eventually, what comes out of a man, the Bible, Jesus says, it's what comes out of a man that defiles him.
Yeah.
What's going to come out of you, like, you can't hide that.
Yeah.
It's there. And so you can put on a facade for a while, but it's always going to expose itself. But you were talking about how the concept of, dive headfirst into humility. I agree. I think, and you mentioned they're not opposites.
Right.
Strength and all of that is not opposite of humility. And I agree. I think leadership, strength, courage, even conflict, everything, humility is that, like, strength is humility.
Yeah.
If it's not done in humility, it's actually not strength. It's weakness. If I have to build myself up and not be humble, it's because I'm insecure. So it's weakness. I think true strength, true leadership, true every one of those good qualities that we look at that we say, oh, a man needs to be strong, a man needs to be this. Those are humility. Without humility, it's not that thing anymore. It's something different. And so I think it's important. I agree with you. You talked about toxic masculinity and how that's not a correct term. And I agree. I use the term in context to the way the culture uses it.
Right. People do act toxic.
Yes.
And claim to be
but
masculine.
That's not masculinity.
Right.
And that's I think where our culture gets it wrong, is they use the phrase toxic masculinity because they've associated these toxic things with masculinity, when in reality, true masculinity is humble.
Yeah.
True masculinity. So that thing is not masculinity. That's actually weakness. And we've just disguised it, or the culture has adopted that as masculinity when it's not. So I agree that there are men who act in a certain way that's toxic, but they're acting opposite of true masculinity. They're not acting in masculinity.
Right.
And I think that's the point you were trying to make. So I agree. I think humility is the center. It's the key for everything else we do. Without that, we've got nothing. Like none of these other qualities are going to operate properly.
Yeah.
So let's take that into the context of marriage then. So if we are men, we're walking in humility, we're walking as leaders, we're the strength, all that coming out of the context of humility. We've talked about leadership a little bit. What makes a man a godly husband?
Stay single forever. Like Paul. I wish you'd be like me. I don't know.
You heard it here
That's
first.
one way to
Stay
never fail
single.
as a husband.
Yeah, that's true. Never get married. I mean, I think all the things that make you a good man and a good leader are the same things that make you a good husband. Just even maybe even more amplified, more required, because there's less times where you feel like you need to turn it off. But then if that's who you are, then that's just who you are, in every aspect. And, being quick to say that you're wrong, walking in humility, all that kind of stuff. It's all required for, any kind of conflict resolution skills with anybody else is definitely what's required for a spouse or for kids or anything like that. Setting that example, knowing that people are watching, even if they're not, just acting as if they are, just being aware of that and that you're, and then taking on that as your responsibility, your family and your, marriage and all of that, just all the same kind of stuff, responsibility, humility, courage, all the things that make a good man, make a good husband.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a huge carryover from being a good biblical man to a biblical husband. I think you have to meet the first one first. You can't be you can't be a biblical husband without being a biblical man first. And you have to be a biological man to be a biblical husband.
What did you just say?
Oh, wait, we can
I'm
edit
not
that
going to
out.
be a part of hate speech on this podcast. I didn't realize what I was
If you're
looking.
triggered, comment down
Right.
below. We'll talk some more.
I'm commenting down below. Please believe you're going to see a comment from my channel that says I commented down below. There's a 100% chance.
So the concept of
Well, I
being...
wasn't done.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I'll be humble and let you finish.
Look at this conflict right now. There's conflict happening.
Conflict
Look at these two men
resolution.
right now going at it.
I think the scriptures are really specific on this topic. There's a ton of scriptures on how to be a good husband, how to be a good man in general.
Yeah.
And for me, and I didn't make this up. I got this from somebody else. I think all of masculinity, being a good man, a good husband, boils down to three things. And I think
Here we go. Get your pen and paper out.
and we've actually already talked about two of them.
If you're going into an anatomy lesson right now, I agree.
No, not biological things.
There's two there, and then
Spiritual
there's
things.
one there that's required.
Yes, you're right. You're right. It's another podcast.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Human Anatomy
Flip on
101.
over to Chase's channel. For
Yeah, go to my channel if you want human anatomy instructions,
Yeah.
not instructions.
Yes.
Dude,
What kind of instructions are you giving, Jay?
yeah, let's not. You better not go to my channel.
Chase has an OnlyFans where he gives anatomy.
The OnlyFans pastor.
Yeah.
That should be our new title at the beginning of the video.
The least subscribed OnlyFans channel in the history
I
of
have
OnlyFans.
0 subscribers. I don't even subscribe to my
Just
channel.
Chase
But-
talking to a camera instead of pretty ladies.
Opens the Bible
Yeah.
in a
Yes.
very intriguing way.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. Very slowly.
Yeah.
You can check him out in the church way, as we
Yeah,
talked about in the
right.
beginning.
Yeah. Check his fruit out. Chase's OnlyFans. Link down below.
Don't go there. It's just embarrassing. You don't want to see all of that. What was I even talking about? The three things.
Three things.
Okay.
I have three actual things.
So I didn't come up with these. They come from scripture, but other people have put them together and kind of pointed them out. And I really like this. We've already talked about two of them. And these three things would be work, protecting, and passing on God's instructions.
That's good.
So this comes from Genesis chapter 2. God's just made Adam and he's placed him in the garden. Genesis 2:15. The Lord God took the man, placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and watch over it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For on the day you eat from it, you will certainly die. So there's two things from this passage that are direct charges to Adam. He's tasked for working in the garden and protecting it.
Yep.
But I also think it's implied here that Adam's responsible for passing on God's instructions when it became necessary. So Eve wasn't created yet, but Eve would eventually be created, and God had spoken to Adam, so somebody needs to pass that on, and that's Adam.
And there were consequences when he didn't.
Right, right. So today, I think as men, we can take these three principles and apply them, and we've already done that to some extent, talking about protecting, and you brought up bringing truth. So truth is God's word. Like that's where it comes from. All truth comes from God. So if we're protecting and we're focusing on preserving truth, we're doing two of those things. But working is the next one I think we need to do. And when we apply that to like a family or a wife being a good husband, working means caring for. So like if we're going to be a husband, that's an agricultural term. So we're caring for our wife. And that requires many different things.
Yeah, I feel like as far as being a godly husband in those three things specifically, protecting is kind of a logical thing at first, but I think it goes deeper than just natural protection, right? So I'm all about natural protection, and obviously you protect your family and you do those things, but I also think there is very big significance in protecting your family spiritually, right? So I think sometimes that gets overlooked in the concept of protecting. So it's my job as a husband and as a father to protect the spiritual lives of my children and my wife. And egalitarians don't come at me, but as a husband, the Bible is clearly teaching that it is your job to help cultivate your wife's spiritual life. Now, to an extent, obviously she has to cultivate her own walk with the Lord, but you are responsible as the leader of your home for the spiritual atmosphere of your home and protecting that spiritual atmosphere of your home, which is why it's important to not just let any old thing in your home. And I'm not even just talking about like looking for a demon behind every corner, but just like I don't let certain influences. No, I'm not talking about Harry Potter.
I'm talking about Harry Potter.
That's a good saying, right?
Harry freaking Potter.
But I'm talking about things like influence. What voices are you allowing in your children's lives? What voices are you allowing in your spouse's life? Like what? I'm gonna get all kinds of comments. What do you mean allow your spouse?
Oh my gosh!
But
you're letting Dumbledore talk.
But I mean, like
somebody's discipling your wife. It's either going to be you or Dumbledore.
But really, like I mean, think about it. So I personally know of certain families who a voice has gotten into a friendship, a voice has gotten into that family.
Voldemort, brother.
It's a bull.
Slytherin household. I'm supposed
to say the name.
Has gotten into there. I'll say it. I got the courage of a man. I will say it.
But so you as the protecting, you're supposed to protect that. And then in both of those other things, I think the other one is passing along kind of ties into one of the next questions, which was being a father. I think not only are you supposed to help that on a relational level with your spouse, but also as a father, one thing that my wife and I are doing with our children, we're going through just entire books of the Bible with them. We're reading it, and I have a son who is 12 and a daughter who's 8, and we sit down and we're not just giving them, they got the full same adult Holy Ghost in them that we got in us, right? Yeah. So now we break it down on their
translates level. To they're just left on their own to figure it out.
Yes. But what I'm saying is we sit down and we're going through entire books of the Bible with them. We're not just telling them the nice little stories. They're like, we went through the entire book of Acts. Now we're going through the book of 1 Thessalonians with them. And we're sitting there, we'll just read a chunk of verses. And I mean, not necessarily a whole chapter, but, good 6, 7, 8 verses, and just talk about it as we go through on their level where they're getting actual Bible and they're getting actual, not just, I don't want them to just know the stories. I grew up and I knew the stories, but I didn't know anything about the Bible. Mm-hmm. Like I could tell you, there was an ark, and I could tell you old Daniel and the Lion's Den, and, Shadrach, Meshach, and that billy goat is what I knew.
That's not actually his name.
I know, but that's what I've always called them.
Same as Abednego.
Actually, though, if we want to get technical,
We don't want the Hebrew.
those names were the Babylonian names given to them.
That's what I'm calling.
They had Hebrew names. But anyways,
Shananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Oh,
Those names?
yeah. Oh, snap. But my point is, I don't want them to just know stories. I want them to know the Bible. I want them to. So we're going through, and of course they're at 12 and 8. If you have 3-year-olds, it might be a completely different, type of scenario you do with them. But I'm saying,
my son likes to chew on the Bible pages.
hey, he's devouring the word.
That's the first step.
Exactly.
Cultivating that ground. And it's interesting. I've got something similar written down here. Work towards your family's physical well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Cultivate your family's spiritual well-being and protect them in both.
Yeah,
so that's like applying those three things.
And it's exactly right. And I think in all three of those things, in every area, there's both a physical and a spiritual reality to both of those. And I think sometimes men are very good at taking care of one of those.
Yeah.
A lot of times men are very good at dealing with the physical.
Sure.
Very lacking a lot of times in taking care of the spiritual side of things.
Yeah. And I would also, I feel like that's where a lot of this identity crisis we currently have is from lack of, fathers being present, either physically just not there or emotionally unavailable, spiritually not a lead, setting the example, whatever it is. So we're just kind of left to figure it out. And that's leading to, the identity crisis that we have, where we find counterfeit ways to figure it out because we haven't been brought up in the way that we should go with good example. And I say we as in our society, because obviously there are great fathers out there, but unfortunately it's less common than it was maybe the generation prior, 2 generations prior to that. So it's just setting that example for your kids of how do you physically protect them, spiritually, being the leader. I would say emotionally too. What does it look like for a father to handle good times and bad times and handle conflict and handle. I was listening to somebody, they were talking about, they made it a point. They were just talking about not overcorrecting, you're in one ditch on one side of the road, then you overcorrect and end up in another ditch on the other side of the road. And they were talking about, their childhood was fraught with dad not being around. And so they made it a point every time they're home, traveling minister, every time they're home, they're present with their kids. They don't answer phone calls. They're there all the time. Then he felt like he was having this conversation with the Lord, where the Lord was like, well, what if I want them to see you handle business calls, handle interactions with ministry stuff, handle your job and your calling and all of that. And so it just kind of, he felt like he course corrected to where he was over in another ditch to where the kids aren't exposed to any of the work or the calling kind of stuff. And so it's just being that example. I'm a strong believer that kids, a lot more is caught than taught. And it's tell them a lot, and you should. And then even if it's an instructing them as it's going through kind of thing, but they're going to see and catch a lot more than we'll teach them.
Yeah, I think emotionally is a very big area that's also left out with men a lot. I know. So my wife's mother passed away last year, and in walking through that emotionally, my kids were very close to her, and emotionally walking through that with them and showing them how to process those emotions is a big part of leading, right? So me as a father, I need to let them see me go through the emotions, me handle the emotions, and walk with them while they handle them. And I think sometimes there's this image of men, I got to be strong for everybody and I can't walk through these emotions because I don't want everybody to see. But they need to see that. Absolutely. They need to see those times of breaking down. They need to see the walking through the hard things. Because when they see that, that's how they grow and see the example of how it's exactly Jesus walked through hard things. And we have those records so we can see how to walk through it. We see Jesus weeping. We see going through those in Scripture. And that's our example as fathers and as husbands to process that and let our spouses and it's a big thing in marriage. A lot of times, learn this is something me and my wife have learned through the years of marriage is it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to, when I say not be okay, I don't mean stay there, but I mean, but it's okay to let your spouse know, hey, I'm going through this. Let's talk through this. I'm feeling this. And holding that back and trying to be the strong one all the time, it doesn't resolve anything, and it doesn't help your family, and it doesn't help you.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference in being emotionally vulnerable and collapsing.
Yeah.
I think as men, we're never supposed to collapse. Yeah. We're always supposed to be the pillar.
Yeah, I agree.
But that doesn't mean that we don't get emotional or we don't feel things.
Exactly.
Because that's unrealistic. Yeah. We're setting young guys up for failure when we tell them that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like, there's no emotions. Be stoic all the time.
Yeah.
Like, Christians bring stoicism into our religion.
Yeah, a lot.
Why? That's a completely different thing.
But the collapsing idea, I think a lot of times the reason there is collapse is because we're not vulnerable emotionally.
Yeah, sure. We never saw anybody walk that out.
So we just hold it in, and then that's going to eventually it's going to boil over at some point. And so the collapse either comes with you just collapse under the weight of it and you just fall to pieces, or you collapse in an outburst that is not healthy. You know what I'm saying?
Family,
Learning to manage it as it comes keeps you from the collapse.
Absolutely.
And I think that's super needed. Go ahead.
Well, I think too, it helps to keep the goal in mind too. Like you're focused on your family's well-being, not like you are concerned with your emotions, but you're also thinking about your family's well-being this whole time. Yes. So like if you gave in completely to your emotions, you would not be good for your family.
Right.
Like we can all admit that, but they also need to see us walk in that, because at the end of the day, we're trying to raise a Christian. Yeah. When our kids get to be 18, whenever they become an adult, like we don't want them to be a good person and have a promising future. We want them to be a Christian, because if they're not a Christian, they have no promising future.
Everything else doesn't matter.
They're promised eternal damnation.
Right. I think you talk about.
Should I have said that word? I apologize.
You're fine.
Darnation.
Darnation. It's a Bible word. It's a Bible word. We're good.
Okay.
But I think, honestly, I think the key to that is, so you're right. We don't give in to our emotions. We manage them.
Yeah.
We don't let our emotions manage us. Right. Giving into them and just completely letting emotion overtake you, where you don't, like you're letting it manage you. But managing it doesn't mean stuffing it down where you just ignore it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Because God gave them to us.
Exactly. Emotions, you don't stuff them down where you don't ignore it. Where you ignore it, you address them, you deal with them, you walk through them, but you're managing the emotion. The emotion is not managing you. Yeah. And I think that's the distinction between the two.
A big one with anger, like we talked about that a minute ago. That's an emotion.
Yeah.
And men are just expected to walk in that and not have control of that a lot of times.
No. Right.
Like that's something you can run away with as a man and it's okay.
Yeah.
When in reality, like you're letting your emotions control you if you're sinning.
Yep.
After you're angry.
Which is the exact opposite of leadership.
Right. So we teach the guys, just in counseling, like emotions are, the spices. And it's like, do you want an entire meal of just pepper and salt? Like, no, not at all. Right. But do you want a meal without any pepper or any salt? No. And that's emotions. That's, that's anger. Good. They're great to be in the passenger seat, but they have no business being in the driver's seat. So it's just, putting them in their place.
That's really helpful.
Mm.
So if you haven't checked out his channel, he's got great stuff on his channel. But Alex, if you haven't been watching the previous episodes, Alex is a counselor. And he always has a good little analogy like that, and I love it. I love your little analogies.
That's the stuff. Like I could go into it all day, but that's the stuff that I needed, and so that's the stuff that sticks out to me. It was just like just being able to explain it in a way that makes sense.
Like if you can't, I like it. It helps me click.
Yeah. What's the quote? That's like Einstein or somebody that's like, if you can't explain it to a 4-year-old, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it was Einstein or if it's one of those quotes that like
one of those smart guys
eventually just gets attributed to Einstein. Like
probably. Einstein and Thomas Jefferson are two people that everything
Winston
gets
Churchill.
To them.
Everything goes back to Winston Churchill. Yeah.
So in talking about this, we'll come to a close in just a moment, but in talking about this, how does other godly men in your life play into this? What's the role of, we talked about not having examples, not having a father at home, not having examples. What do you see as the importance or the role of other men in your life as a man?
I think examples is a big one. Like we learn anything first by emulating other people doing it.
Yeah.
So think of like a baby learning English or, or learning how to talk or whatever. You just copy what other people are doing and then you figure out your own voice over time and your vocabulary and all that. But it starts with copying. And so just having kind of a path kind of started, carved out, and you walk down that path a little bit and, well, my calling and my, whatever goes this way or whatever I want to do kind of deviates from that. And that's okay. And finding somebody else that can take you a little further down. Then eventually you get to where you're making your own path and that's all good. But, but just having people that, that can help, blaze those trails for you and help you down them.
I think if you want to be a Christian man, you need to get a group of Christian men. That's kind of a necessity we need. And there's a ton of scriptures on this too. Proverbs 27, everybody knows this one. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And then in Ecclesiastes, we don't always go there for wisdom, but it's a very wise book. 4:9, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up. But pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm, but how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands not easily broken.
Right.
I'm not lying down with y'all.
Well, if we're freezing, you're going to, I promise.
No, dude, I'm going to Luke Skywalker cut that thing open. And
But we need other men to push us, but also restrain us too.
That's good.
Like iron sharpens iron. If you're about to go down a wrong path, I need you guys to pull me back, restrain me.
For sure. And humility is required in that process.
Exactly. I think a big part of this, and I love what you find Christian men. A lot of people make excuses in this area. Either they have an excuse for, well, I don't have any Christian men around me. Find them.
Right.
There's. I promise you, there are good, godly men somewhere where you can find them. You just have to. It maybe involve, hey, I maybe in my church I'm going to go and I'm going to start seeking out these men and start building relationships, or maybe there's a men's group, a good Christian men's group somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not your church. Maybe there's not a lot of men in your church. Maybe it's going outside of, saying, hey, I'm devoted to this church, but I'm going to go join this group to have that, thing. So finding that group. But I think another issue is I see a lot of, this is again a cultural issue. In our culture, the whole social justice idea has created this context of victimhood where I look in what did you go through? Like we see someone who commits a crime. Well, why are they committing a crime? What did they go through in their life to make them so?
Generational trauma is 14 generations.
Right. And
did you go back to 14 generations and ask them? Because is that what happened?
And so, people come up with these excuses and it's like,
absolutely.
Okay, so you grew up without a father. It's not an excuse to not change what you're doing now. Right. And I think we look at our excuses and think, oh, I can't do it. You don't have to have had that example in the past, but that's not an excuse to not find those godly men now.
Right.
So ultimately, if you grew up without a father or you didn't have that, or maybe you had a bad father, you had the father, but he wasn't an example that you want to follow, don't use that as an excuse to keep you from doing what you know to do now. And I've seen that in people where they'll just say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. Oh, well. And they just live however they want because instead of saying, okay, I'm going to change the pattern.
Yeah.
And so don't let excuses and don't be a victim. If there's one thing I can say, quit being men, quit being victims. Like you're not a victim. Change your mentality, change your circumstance. You take ownership of it and do what you need to do now and put all that other stuff behind you.
This is where you be strong.
Yeah.
That's where that comes in.
Absolutely.
So to wrap this up then, I want to end this with each one of us giving, if we had to pick our top advice for men, what would be your top advice for men?
Don't sweat the petty things and don't pet the sweaty things. God bless. Good night.
That is fantastic.
I would say the biggest one is figure out who you are. And like who you are, the real you is like who God's called you to be, like what your real identity in God is. Figure that out and just let everything else flow from that.
That's really good.
Chase?
I don't know. Which one thing? Well, actually, I'll read my last sentence here. This is my ending note. A Christian man is selfless and steadfast as he provides, protects, and points to God. So that's kind of like a rewording of those three things again, but throwing in the selfless thing and the humility, wrapping it all up together.
That's good. For me, my best advice that I would say right now is don't react, respond. I think many times it's easy to jump into reaction mode, whether it's a reaction to not having an example in our lives or reaction to a situation that occurred or reaction. Don't react, respond. Don't immediately jump to a reaction, slow down, see what God's saying about it, and then respond correctly.
Yeah.
So don't react, respond.
Absolutely.
It's a good way to keep yourself out of trouble.
Yeah.
Yes. Don't always do it perfectly.
No, I could have avoided a lot of trouble if I would have followed that advice.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Me too.
I would also say to godly men, they need to serve God where they're at.
Serve God where you're at.
Serve God where
Everybody.
you are at.
Where are you at?
If you're a man, you're doing that.
Yeah. And if you're not a man, you're not.
If you're not a man,
man.
you're a woe man.
Whoa, man.
Whoa, man. That's why I know Garden of Eden was in Jamaica.
Here we go.
But what is a woman?
You ready for lame pastor joke? Let's ruin Matt's lame pastor joke. Don't let him tell the punchline. Don't let him tell the punchline. Don't let him tell the punchline. No.
The Garden of Eden was in Jamaica because when God brought Eve to Adam, he said, "Whoa, man."
That's
where we
not
got
what
this.
he
You just culturally appropriate.
That's
I
what
sure
the
did.
scripture says. The Garden of Eden was in the Middle East, not Jamaica.
Don't bring the scriptures into this.
You're a heretic.
Hey, Matt Moss. Hey, Matt Moss. Knock, knock. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
I eat mop.
I don't want to answer.
I eat mop, dude.
I ate my poo.
Oh, gross.
That's nasty,
Why did you
man.
say that in front of almost 500 people? 471
71.
people.
29 more people. So let's jump into saint or ain't. Dun, dun, dun.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, D Generation X would like. Oh, sorry. So this week on Saint or you guys ever watch D Generation X? You guys
Absolutely.
The
Saint. Saint or ain't.
Oh, you didn't know? Okay. Wrestling from the 90s. Saint or ain't? No. All right. This week, Saint or ain't. So Saint or ain't is the segment in which we decide, is a particular topic available to the saints of God, or does this make you an ain't of God?
So just to recap, we've done astrology,
Yep.
and that was an ain't.
It was an ain't.
We did secular concerts and music.
That was
That was
a
a saint.
saint with some caveats.
What do we talk about tonight?
We did another one too. We did cussing.
Cussing, yeah.
Cussing.
And that was a mixed review of that one.
Chase
Mixed
said
review.
let her fly.
Said ain't with an
I
asterisk.
said maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Potential ain't. This week, saint or ain't cigars and or smoking pipes.
Cigars or pipes.
Oh.
That's a big thing. So we see a lot of, there seems to be a YouTube Christian culture that's emerging, and then a lot of that is intertwined with some of these things. I think of like craft beers or whiskeys, but I know cigars and pipes are kind of a big part of that subculture as well. So let's talk about it. Saint or ain't?
Saint or ain't? Chase, I'm going to let you open this one up.
I'm going to say 100% saint.
Saint.
100%.
Oh, that's a strong take. 100%. So let's.
Well, let me walk
The
that
second
back.
you smoke a cigar, everyone that smokes cigars loves Jesus Christ and
I
worships
say a
him.
high proportion of them, bro.
Yeah,
But
can't
So
not.
let's talk about it.
it'd be easier to start off talking about what would make it an ain't. So if you're somehow using it as a crutch or you're abusing it, it would be an ain't. And that's
Sure.
anything, whether you're going to a buffet or you're using TV that way. Anything can be an ain't if we really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Are
But-
you using TV that way?
No, I barely watch TV.
Are you using
Are you talking
podcasts,
to me? Are you talking to me?
I was talking to the camera.
Not this.
Are you using it that way?
As soon as this podcast is over, turn it off. But finish this first.
Yeah. Watch the rest of our podcast too, and then turn them off.
Turn them off forever until next week.
No, tobacco, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Nothing.
Can't give me a chapter and verse.
Right.
Sorry.
Just like crystal meth. There's nothing in
So we
here.
can find some distinguishing
We can find
factors
some.
of that.
Well,
So-
okay. I was
Talking
with you.
about pure tobacco.
Oh, yeah.
So let's
Pure
let's
tobacco.
talk about that. Let's flesh that out because you're exactly right. Like there's things that we would say are wrong that you're not going to find the chapter and verse on.
Right.
So let me start off, and I'll tie it in. We'll focus in on cigars and pipes, but just to mention other types of tobacco or other types of things that you could smoke. Anything that is addictive in your life, anything that becomes an addiction in your life, whether it be smoking or anything else, anything that is an addiction,
A new master.
wrong. It's a new master. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
And some people will argue about harming your body. If you don't know, if you're watching this and know, you don't really inhale on a cigar or a pipe.
Not supposed to.
Not supposed to. I'm not saying that there aren't people who do, but you're not supposed
Right.
to. It's not how you generally smoke a cigar.
Go the Bill Clinton route.
So
Don't
can
inhale.
there be? Am I going to sit here and say that there's zero impact to your body? No. Am I going to say, however, that it has any major impact to your body having a cigar? No. So the key is anything that if you are harming yourself or if you're addicted to something, those routes top wrong. However, you're not harming yourself by having a cigar. And if you smoke a cigar a day or a cigar a week, not harming yourself. Now, if you can't go without smoking a cigar, you've got a problem.
Sure.
If you can't go without smoking a pipe, you've got a problem.
If you got mouth cancer from dipping tobacco, it's probably not good for you to start smoking cigars.
Just
Right.
saying.
Yep.
So those are things that you want to keep an eye out on. But anything, my big take on it is I saint it. I say absolutely a saint. You cannot. For those of you who are freaking out right now, how dare they smoke cigars? They're okay with smoking cigars and
Well,
pipes.
the statistics say cigar smokers live longer than non-cigar smokers.
Yeah.
Pipe smokers live longer than cigar smokers.
What?
Yeah, for real. And there's all kinds of studies coming out about
Both.
low amounts of nicotine as well. Like it's a neural protector. It's supposed to protect you against Alzheimer's and things.
Yeah.
There you go. So that there is benefit
Praise
to it. So
God.
I saint it, but I say always, as with anything, if it becomes something that is and it's not really an addictive thing, but like the culture can be, the idea of it can be, and if that
Yeah.
becomes something that I have to have, then you've got a problem.
If you're stressed and you need a cigar at the end of the day, you should stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should
It's a
not be how
crutch.
you handle
Yeah.
stress as a crutch. You should handle stress in a different way.
Yeah. I think it falls kind of what you alluded to. Like we're good at in the church creating rules where there aren't rules. And some of them are well intentioned of like, hey, I'm going to make this boundary so that way I don't get into sin. And then we backtrack and we make the boundary the sin line.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I'm not going to, cigars are bad because they're associated with bad people at whiskey drinking bars, and that'll lead me to drinking or being drunk or, whatever. And so like, okay, that's fine if that's your boundary, but that's not a sin. And so stepping over that because it's not okay for you that doesn't mean anybody's doing anything wrong, otherwise. So yeah, I would definitely say saint, and there's, plenty, if not most of the people that we look up to in like recent church history, are cigar and pipe smokers, and and it's just, it's not, again, like if harmful to your body, like cigarettes or, an addiction, or where their sole purpose is to be addictive, then it would definitely be something else worth considering. But if it's just something you enjoy doing, something you do correctly, something you do for the right reasons, fellowship thing, whatever it is, yeah.
I think probably the only case that could be made against it is that it could be somewhat have health effects on your mouth or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, do you drink Mountain Dew? Do you?
This is bad for you.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say
crap.
Mountain Dew's if you drink Mountain Dew every day, it's probably worse than smoking cigars every day.
Totally agree.
And even with the concept of it being like the mouth, like that's not going to be an issue unless you are like it becomes an issue where you're constantly like,
right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just like with food can be very bad for you.
Right.
But if you have a McDonald's meal once in a blue moon versus someone who's eating McDonald's every day, you know what I'm saying? There's a difference in how much you're doing that, whether it can become an issue for you. And to your point of, you talk about people like in church history, I am going to name drop here because I think this is an old name that all of us would agree with. C.S. Lewis.
The man.
One of the great, like some of you watching this might be like, how dare you talk about C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest theologians that many of you probably would love and love his stuff, smoked a pipe.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's not Tolkien.
Like all those guys. Who's the, not Chesterton, but Spurgeon.
Spurgeon said something like he would never give up his cigars or something like that.
There was like a back and forth between him and like a lady, and he was like, he called it offering incense to heaven or something like that.
Hey, man.
Like, heck yeah.
So
dude.
yeah, it's not, but ultimately your point is absolutely correct. If you cannot make a scriptural case for it being a sin, don't put it on others. It may be for you that you avoid them because it's a boundary, something in your conscience, just a personal feeling, a personal thing. And if you violate that, if you have this personal, conscious issue with it and you violate that, for you, that would be sin. But that's not a sin that you can place on other people who don't follow your conscience.
You shouldn't.
Right.
Yeah. You shouldn't place on other people.
Absolutely. So boom. Saint.
Let's stamp this.
Saint. 100%.
Yeah.
Saint.
It will make you a saint.
When you get to heaven, if you got a cigar in your hand.
You got a cigar in your hand.
That's what heaven's going to smell like, is cigar smoke. It all goes somewhere. That's just science.
And on a side note, I'm just saying, on a personal level, the three of us have had some awesome times fellowshipping and talking about the Lord.
It's one of my favorite
at a cigar shop.
I did not inhale.
I did not inhale.
So that's the best thing ever. Cigars are.
So we've had some great with non-Christians. We've been able to talk about the Lord with non-Christians and just sitting there smoking a cigar. So I'm just saying,
we were doing a little serving God where we were at.
We were serving God where we were at.
We were there and we were serving God.
So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. When we hit 500 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away a CSB chronological Bible with day-by-day readings to get you through the Bible in a year. It's a good way to help you understand the Bible, reading it through chronologically in the order that it happened. It makes it come alive when you read that. So we're at the time of this recording, 471 subscribers. So 29 subscribers to go, and we will be at our 500 mark.
So close.
All you got to do to win it is be subscribed. So click the subscribe button, hit that like or that notification bell, like the video. Comment down below. Tell us what you think it means to be a godly man. Tell us if you absolutely think we're crazy for smoking cigars. And
if you disagree with, let us know. We would love to debate you in the comments.
Yeah. Email it to, we're not going to read this, at thewordroom.com. Yeah.
But no, so share the video. And if you haven't checked out the other videos from our previous podcasts, we are working on making things better. So we've got, hopefully this will be better audio out of this one than some of the other ones. So if you got ideas on how we can make the podcast better, or any ideas for any segments or things you'd like to see, comment them down below. We'll see you next time.